This is a People First Radio podcast.
A Gabriola Island playwright and pillar of the local theater community is putting his own story on the stage. Boy Player from Frank Moher chronicles the author's experience of being orphaned and moving across a continent in his youth. The one-man show, also performed by Moore, is hitting Nanaimo's OV Arts Center this April. It's the third in a series of plays exploring themes of men's mental health from Western Edge Theater, a company founded by Moore over 20 years ago. He's since passed the reins of Western Edge on to Jonathan Greenaway, who happens to be directing him in Boy Player. The two of them came to CHLY to speak about the show.
I'm Frank Moher. I wrote the play and perform it, and it's dealing with a part of my life that I found interesting.
I'm John Greenaway, and I am directing the play.
And the play, Boy Player, is one of a series of plays from Western Edge Theater touching on themes of men's mental health. As you alluded to there, Frank, it is your story. Can you tell me what you're going to be showcasing, what you're going to be sharing with people?
Okay, well, I'd like to assure people it's not my entire life story. I wouldn't do that to an audience, but it is about a portion of my life when I was young, after I was orphaned, and I went suddenly from Edmonton, Alberta to New York City to live with my sister's family, and the play is about that, and then what ensued, and how finally I got through all that.
And so when you're taking some of those experiences, you're living in Edmonton, orphaned, go to New York, what are the parts of that? How did you approach taking those experiences and putting them on the stage, turning them into a play? What are you hoping to get across for people?
Well, the play is a pretty good emotional workout, I'll say that, but it was important to me that there'd be humor in it, that there'd be lightness in it. There are songs in it. There's a kind of a leitmotif in it about how I glommed onto musical theater even before I left Edmonton, and that kind of got me through. Theater in general got me through, and then eventually I met a young woman named Diana who had also been orphaned as a kid, and that really got me through. And we've now been married 43 years. So it was important to me that there be light in the darkness, that there be laughs among the emotion.
And I was reading another piece you talked about the play in, and you were talking about taking inspiration maybe from some Charles Dickens stories
Yeah.
that dealt with orphans, and I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about that.
Well, yeah. So orphans have always made for a good story, you know. There's a theory about it. You know, a lot of Disney movies have orphans in them. And the theory is because there's kind of no going back, I guess, from being an orphan, and you're out there on your own in the world. And so the stakes are high, and they were high for me in a lot of ways. I was, well taken care of, but even so, kind of out there at the edge of the light beam, as Einstein might say. So I allude to those other orphan stories partly for fun. If you read Oliver Twist, it makes me feel way better because that guy really had it hard, right? But the story does have those same resonances as that, and Anne of Green Gables, and even Kimba in The Lion King, who is technically an orphan. He only lost one parent, but basically that's called a single orphan, I think it's called. But anyway, so I don't know. I like kind of identifying with those characters in literature who went through something similar or maybe worse.
Well, we're talking there about stories that everyone kind of knows, or things that are like fairy tales or Disney's movies, or Charles Dickens novels from close to 200 years ago almost at this point. This is something that you have lived. How do you think of what might be tropes, or like what might be the stories everyone sees that might be their source of information on what it's like being an orphan, if that is not something that has happened to them or a close person? Like, how is that different for you?
Well, I think one reason I thought the play might interest people is that it's a very kind of specific experience going from Edmonton to New York City in 1968. And from there I went to, that by itself was a lot of culture shock. From there, I went to a town called New Canaan, Connecticut, just outside New York, which was the second richest town in America. And my friends were generally people coming from a pretty privileged place. They were great. We did kind of crazy Great Gatsby-esque things while I was there. The whole thing felt like being in The Great Gatsby, though I had not at that time read The Great Gatsby yet. But, you know, the hick from out west who lands in, as Nick Carraway does in The Great Gatsby, who lands in this highly privileged, quaint, beautiful town, which was the second richest town in America. And as I say in the play, it was enchanting, but that kind of money can buy a lot of enchantment. So I think throughout the play is really kind of particular and specific to what happened to me. And then I try to open it up so that it will connect with people about finding a passion in life, whether that's a thing, a pursuit, a person, or in my case, two of them, and how that really can, save your life.
Now, John, I'm going to bring you into this. You are directing the show. You're also the artistic director for Western Edge Theatre. Frank, who is the writer of the show, it's a show about his life story. He's also the founder of Western Edge Theatre. What is that dynamic like when you're directing him in a show?
Yeah, it's something I've sort of marveled at this year in general, doing the season. I've had the privilege to work with a number of men who I regard as mentors in my life. Frank definitely being one of them. He was a university professor for me when I was at VIU years ago doing some script writing and creative writing courses. And then having been involved in Western Edge in my late teens and early 20s and stuff before I went away, and coming back and having that chance to work with him now in a different form as taking on the reins of Western Edge Theatre, and then also directing him. It's been wonderful, and I've just been blessed to have that trust that's been given to me. I was admittedly nervous at first when we had originally talked about it about a year ago, about producing it for the Gabriola Theatre Festival, which we premiered it at, and then for Western Edge. He was asking for me to direct it, and I said, "Are you sure? I don't have these life experiences of orphanage or the wisdom of years that Frank does have." But with my background in drama therapy and therapeutic theater, and in that case, Frank reassured me that would be something he was looking for, and something that I could probably hold space for, with the emotional depth that he does go into his personal stories. I think it was a really good fit for me to be able to flex my therapeutic theater muscles and holding space. We talk about stepping into the river of memories of his show, and that river of memories, we want to make sure he doesn't get carried downstream. So I'm always at the shore with a rope ready, and the creative juices flow back and forth between us pretty well, and that's really fun too.
Yeah, Jonathan and I agreed at the first rehearsal, we're not here to do therapy. I mean, doing something like this can be therapeutic, but that's not really the end point. We're doing a show. We're there to really make you feel something and entertain you. But I do think, in theater, people have become more aware of the issue of safety, often around sexual intimacy in a play, but all sorts of things. And it's something my generation of theater people did not think about that much, but it's great that a new generation does. And so that was definitely a bonus. Frankly, doing the play makes me feel good. I enjoy doing it. I enjoy telling the story and trying to make it into something bigger. But I also think it was important that I could know I was being kind of handled expertly by Jonathan.
That's very kind, yeah. And we have a lot of fun playing with it, right? Getting to be able to push Frank in directions, and he'll look at me and go, "What the heck was that?" And we get to experiment with, little bits of dramatic interventions to play through the things and have fun with it for sure, yeah.
Well, what is that relationship like? You talked about feeling like you're kind of at the side of a river with a rope if you ever need to step in and pull him out. I imagine, like for any actor who is doing any kind of acting related to an experience that could be traumatic, there is this line where you're trying to be as authentic as you can, and maybe you're channeling some of your own experiences, even if it's not an autobiographical play, you're channeling some of your own difficult experiences to find those emotions. And there's a recognition that can be great for your performance, and that can also be hard for you. So how do you do that piece of standing by the river? What does that look like?
Absolutely, yeah. I think you really hit the nail on the head with the word authentic. It's something that I strive for in just my directing beyond the therapeutic theater side of things, but just for theater in general, is the balance of authenticity and the balance of spontaneity, and those working in tandem. Where we want to be authentic, and if we relate back to old theater theory of Stanislavski's emotional recall, pulling up things from our life that connect with the actor, but then also can be transferred to the audience to be able to connect with that authentic realness of place, of setting, of emotions that are situated in the content that people are witnessing on stage. And then spontaneity being that Frank, especially in rehearsal, less so in performance, because we do want something sort of standardized and relatively the same so the stage manager doesn't lose his mind. But that spontaneity, so I don't ever tell, that this is the moment you have to cry, or this is the moment you have to do that. And I've done that with the other shows this year too. It's, let that naturally be found and let it come from you from an authentic place. And then if things do become overwhelming, knowing that I am there, and that the stage manager's there, and that we have that support that's available. And I don't think Frank has ever really gone swept down the river in any capacity for that. It's great control in that sense, but there is that sense where something new might come up from a rehearsal, where there's emotions that are deepened at a moment that we didn't recognize before, and it might be at a different time. And I think in general, it's just to know that if I'm being affected by the story that's being told, then the audience should be too. And it's joyful, and it's sad, and it's all those elements that make a real human story. And that's the sort of takeaway from this season in general has been that with these stories of men's mental health and the journeys that different people take in their dramatic presentations, all resonate with an audience. From what we've heard from feedback, is that they feel like they're not alone, and that's the main message that I think transcends.
Yeah, so this is part of a series of shows about men's mental health that Western Edge is putting on, and I'm wondering if you could delve into why you chose that framing and what you were hoping to get across when you chose that framing. What do you want people to know?
Yeah, I think a part of it was, like with Boy Player and Frank's show, was that I was hearing these stories of people that had written things and wanting to produce things that resonated on such a personal level. And they were, like I said before, these great male role models in my life. And I think there's this modern context of male toxic masculinity and that existing, and the opportunity to showcase the opposite of that, be able to showcase men that can be vulnerable, men that can showcase their darker moments and say, look, I'm here and I'm in front of you and you're not alone in that sense. So that was a part of it. Another part of it, I like theming the seasons for Western Edge. Last season we did a season on LGBTQ plus theater, queer theater, and women's voices in the space, promoting space for female stories and queer stories. And then this season, sort of flipping that on its head and addressing the very real issue of men's mental health and mental health in general, because it's not just men that are affected, obviously, but also in men's stories of mental health, it takes a village, it takes a whole community of all people to support anybody going through those kinds of experiences that we see on the stage. And I think that the main message I've seen from Baker's Dozen in November, we had Clownfish, which was another one-person show in February. And then with Frank Moher as Boy Player, we get to see these locally written pieces by local playwrights that are showcasing things that are very personal to them, and that just resonates on another level.
This is People First Radio. I'm speaking with playwright Frank Moher. He's the writer and performer of Boy Player, an autobiographical show that tells the story of being orphaned at a young age and moving from Edmonton to New York. It's being performed in Nanaimo this April, the third in a series of plays on men's mental health from Western Edge Theatre. Also taking part in the conversation is Jonathan Greenway, the artistic director of Western Edge Theatre and director of Boy Player. And Frank, you have this show. It was written before this series of plays on men's mental health. So when you're coming into a series and there's this framing that it's around men's mental health, what is that like for you? How do you approach those themes? What do you think resonates between your show and those themes?
Well, I've actually, knowing we were going to be, we first did it at the Gabriola Theatre Festival last summer, Jonathan directed, and that went really well. But knowing we were going to be doing it again, I did some further revision, some addition to it and whatnot to kind of sharpen that aspect of it and to be kind of yet more candid about it. What resonates for me is that I think it's actually really important that men do this, both for their own sake and for the sake of the people around them, their partners, etc. Be more candid about it, be more aware of it in themselves and the impact of mental health on their behavior, which, as we know, can go the wrong way, can become toxic. So I think I'm really, really glad to be part of this season because I think it's hitting on something really important and, makes me reflect on that in myself.
And when we talk about some of the experiences that you have gone through that are chronicled in this play, things like becoming an orphan, things like moving from Edmonton to New York after that. What is your perspective maybe from those experiences on if we were to talk about like the determinants of health? How do you view that idea of a person's mental health in the context of like the things that have happened to them, having written this show and having done that reflection?
Right. Well, so the play for the first half, say, is kind of about how I used theater, and in particular musical theater, to kind of get through. I was in my first play at the age of 11, after my dad died, just before my mom died, and I kind of just clung to theater at that point as a life raft, I think, and continued to do so for quite a while. But eventually what happens in the play is I am able to, I learn to, because of my connection with Diana, build kind of a self and a life around things more substantial than that. Theater's great, musicals, I love them still, but in the end, I was able, through connection with Diana and eventually our children, to build something larger. So for me, I guess the point is that, you can end up in dark places, but you can find your way out of it. And I hope the play carries that message.
And the idea you touched on there, what really stood out to me is hearing that something like theater could be a real outlet or like a channel for you to work through some things, or a thing you could really depend on. And then it sounds like that is fantastic, but also having some kind of thing beyond the theater so that it, didn't become your whole identity, but was like a healthy channel. And then there was other kind of connection beyond that.
Yeah, and I'm glad to still be doing it, frankly, but as part of a much, much larger picture.
And you founded Western Edge Theatre. You live on Gabriola Island. What could you tell me about maybe the connection, the community aspect of theater here in the mid-Vancouver Island region, maybe thinking of it as like determinants of health, mental health, resilience, buffer, etc.?
Okay, well, first, I want to say I think Jonathan does an absolutely terrific job of running Western Edge artistically. He has maintained the spirit of the company, which was to push the envelope a bit, be a bit edgy sometimes, do a lot of new plays by writers from our own community. And he's also then moved the company forward in ways too. So thanks, Jonathan. I always said when it was 2022 when I kind of began to think about Western Edge, partly because I was doing a series on Gabriola at the Gabriola Theatre Centre with a guy named Anthony Holland, who was kind of a very important figure in BC theatre. He'd moved to Gabriola and he started a series of staged readings. And he would bring in actors from the island, but also from Nanaimo and elsewhere. And I looked around and said, wow, there's a ton of talented people around here. They should have more opportunity to do their work, and people should have more opportunity to enjoy their work. So that was part of the impetus behind it, and that was definitely kind of community-driven. And also to pay people was part of the idea. The other thing I would say was that at the time I would say I started it so there'd be something on in town that I wanted to go to. Because in those days, the breadth of theater programming, let's say, was not extensive. And so I wanted Western Edge to bring a new flavor to the theater community on central Vancouver Island. And I hope it did that. But to me, absolutely, theater is all about community. That relates to Boy Player because, again, I don't, if it was just my story and, hey, come hear me talk about myself and feel sorry for me, if it was just that, I'd be embarrassed to do it. I think it is a particular story about a particular time in my life that holds up as a story and as a broader interest. But to me, the resonating with others in the audience around these things and whatever the equivalent experience in their life might have been that made them vulnerable, that helped them find themselves, that they had to struggle through, and hopefully either came out the other side or know that you can come out the other side. All that is really important to me with the play. And I think that is an aspect of theater that is essential, that it is bigger than just you. It is connecting with a broad range of people in the dark in one place. And increasingly, man, we need that experience.
And to that point, if this were like a memoir that you wrote or, I don't know, a documentary that you made and then put on the internet, I suppose the difference with theater is that you have this live audience, you have that opportunity to connect with them in person while you're doing the thing itself, and then maybe see how it's going over in real time, chat with people, hear about that right after the show is done. I'm wondering for both of you, since you performed this play on Gabriola Island last year, and then, John, this is number 3 in a series on men's mental health. What has that response from the audience been? What has the feedback and the connection been like so far from the plays?
Yeah, I think the element of congregation to a space, sitting in the dark together, knowing that you've come together. You arrive at theater and you often more so start to recognize people the more that you come, and you say, oh, there's so-and-so, and oh, there's this person. There's an element of congregating in a similar sense to a religious venue. I consider that closest thing for me and to religious experiences is watching people all stand together and applaud an emotion that has been presented for an hour and a half, 2 hours on stage, and for everyone to witness and feel those feelings that are presented and to connect to that in a universal sort of way. The general feedback that we've gotten is how people have discussed that it's so important to hear stories that are deeper in a way that connect to real stories, to real people that are in our community, that are presented by local actors. Like Western Edge is always striving to hire local, to tell local stories, but also ones that resonate with the Mid-Island area as well, even if we're not doing something that's directly written from here. And and I think that the feedback for this kind of programming is we hear people wanting more of that. Our sort of tagline now that I'm angling for Western Edge is cutting edge theater for the Mid-Vancouver Island area. And I think that's something that Western Edge does well, in the sense that we strive for a quality of professionalism, a professional caliber and standard of the kinds of shows we do, whether it's through the directing and the acting and the caliber that's required to pull off really quality theater. And I think there's a lot of great groups in town that are doing really, really interesting, wonderful things. And Western Edge is sort of trying to carve its own niche and focus on the local element and stories that are cutting edge, whether it's through the technical presentation of projections and sound and stuff that Boy Player has, for instance, and that Clownfish utilized an original projection sound as well, and just doing sort of more innovative things and trying to push the envelope, as Frank said. Yeah.
What would you like folks to know about where and when they can see the show?
Yeah, so Boy Player opens April 17th, and then it runs for 2 weekends. It closes on the 26th, and people can get their tickets at westernedge.org. Boy Player, it'll be running at the OV Art Center, which is just up on Victoria Road. Opens April 17th, as I said, and it should be a lot of fun, yeah.
Is there anything else you think it's important to bring to the conversation today about Boy Player or any of the themes we've touched on so far?
Well, I would like to pick up on a lot of fun because it is a lot of the time a lot of fun. Either I'm making fun of myself or I'm sending up theater or all sorts of things. So it is not I once said to my son, I've always enjoyed a bad time in the theater, meaning, plays that, are serious and dark and give me an emotional workout. But Boy Player is not that, or it's not just that. It's equally about finding light and having fun and getting through that way.
One of the people, just to add to that, feedbacks when I talked to some people after the Gabriola show, there were tears. And those tears, talking to them, and they said, they felt a lot of different things through the performance, but the tears at the end were joy for the character of Frank that was being presented on stage, and the resolution that was found in the end of the piece. Without giving any spoilers away, it's a truly beautiful bit of storytelling and a very cathartic ending.
Well, John Greenway, Frank Moher, thank you both very much for coming down to the studio to talk about it.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Frank Moher is the writer and director of Boy Player, a show that tells the story of being orphaned at a young age, moving from Edmonton to New York, and finding love. Jonathan Greenway is directing. He's also the artistic director for Western Edge Theatre. The show is hitting the stage at Nanaimo's OV Arts Centre this month as the third in a series of shows exploring themes of men's mental health.
People First Radio, People First Media, and People First Stories are community media projects of Vancouver Island Mental Health Society and are produced in Nanaimo, British Columbia. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of Vancouver Island Mental Health Society or its broadcast, podcast, and social media partners.